The night was silent, except for the restless hum of his thoughts. Jeff lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling of a modest apartment in New York. The air was thick, heavy with questions that never left him. What if he was wrong? What if the vision that consumed him was nothing but a fragile illusion? Behind every thought, behind every flicker of doubt, there was a shadow that whispered, "You could lose everything." He wasn't poor, not anymore. He had stability. A career at D.E. Shaw, one of the most respected firms on Wall Street. He had the kind of life people pointed to as success. A high-paying job, comfort, prestige. But beneath the polished surface, he felt the chains of safety tightening around him. He could see the path his life was taking, predictable, orderly, suffocating. The world called it security. He called it death by routine. Every night, he replayed the same memory. The sterile office floor, colleagues moving like ghosts between cubicles, the air perfumed with ambition, yet poisoned with monotony. He saw himself reflected in the glass of those skyscraper windows, older, grayer, a man who had once dreamed of building something extraordinary, but had settled for surviving. That image haunted him more than poverty ever could. And then came the spark. A statistic buried in a report. Internet usage was growing at 2,000% per year. Numbers that seemed impossible, absurd, almost violent in their acceleration. To most, it was trivia. To Jeff, it was a glimpse of destiny. That night, staring at the ceiling, he whispered to himself, "What if I built a store on the web? Not a corner shop, not a chain. Something larger, endless, a place where every book ever written could live." The thought sent chills down his spine. But so did the consequences. To chase this dream, he would have to abandon the safety of his position, step into the unknown, and drag his wife, his family, into a storm that no one else could see. He remembers the drive. A long, endless drive across the country with his wife, Mackenzie, beside him. Boxes in the trunk, fear in the air. Every mile carried them further from stability, deeper into uncertainty. He typed out the business plan in the passenger seat, a car rattling on old roads, while the world outside blurred into anonymity. It was madness, but it was also freedom. Seattle, a garage that smelled of oil and dust. The birth of Amazon looked nothing like the empire it become. The walls were bare. The desks were made of doors, cheap and hollow, hammered together with urgency. The phone lines were unreliable. The website barely functioned. Behind the illusion of ambition, there was nothing but fragility. And the world mocked him. They said books? Who buys books on a screen? Who trusts credit cards on the internet? Who believes in something as intangible as cyberspace? The investors shook their heads. Colleagues from his past smiled with pity. Bezos threw it all away for a dream. He heard their voices at night, louder than the crickets, sharper than any insult. The first obstacle was silence. Orders trickled in like drops of rain on a desert floor. Every time the phone rang, his heart jumped. Every time it didn't, the silence became heavier. He worked through the nights, coding, packaging, shipping, answering emails. His hands shook from exhaustion. His body ached. His ambition was eating him alive, and yet he kept feeding it. There were mistakes, orders lost, books damaged, systems crashing. There was humiliation, too. The day servers collapsed under the weight of a few hundred simultaneous users, proving just how fragile their infrastructure was. He could feel the shame creeping in. I left everything for this? Money ran thin. Credit cards maxed out. The future looked like a thin rope fraying under his weight. Friends whispered that he had gone insane. His parents, confused but loyal, invested their savings into his vision, risking their own future for a dream they could barely understand. That faith was heavier than any doubt, a responsibility that cut deep. And then The first victory. Small, almost invisible to the world, but monumental to him. An order came in, not from a friend, not from family, not from anyone he knew. A stranger had placed trust in his creation. A stranger had chosen to believe. Jeff printed the receipt, framed it, and stared at it in silence. It wasn't profit. It wasn't proof. But it was a sign. A fragile light in the abyss. Yet even as the orders grew, so did the shadows. The press dismissed him. Competitors circled like vultures. Lawsuits appeared. The system strained, raking under demand. With each fragile success came new nightmares. He understood then that victory wasn't the end of struggle. It was the beginning of new wars. And still, he pressed forward. Because to stop, even for a moment, would mean death. Not of the company, not of the idea, but of himself. The boy who once lay awake staring at the ceiling, haunted by mediocrity, would never forgive the man who chose to settle. The world saw the garage, the chaos, the fragile beginnings. But they didn't see the nights of silence, when fear clawed at his throat. They didn't see the weight of shame, the loneliness of doubt, the fear of dragging everyone he loved into ruin. They didn't see him whispering into the darkness, "What if I'm wrong?" That is the truth of the beginning. Not glamour. Not brilliance, just fear. Fear, and the decision to move anyway. The receipt from that first anonymous customer still trembled in his hands when the doubts returned. A single order didn't erase the shadows. It only sharpened them. Because one stranger could be a miracle, or a mistake. Every day became a battle between growth and collapse. Orders trickled in, then swelled. With each new customer came new chaos. Packages piled up in the garage until there was no space to move. Printers jammed. Systems broke. Servers crashed. Every small success dragged behind it the weight of fragility, the reminder that the dream could shatter at any moment. He lived in the hum of machines, the glow of screens, the echo of tape-sealing boxes at 3 in the morning. Sleep came in fragments, stolen between shipments. Meals were cold, rushed, forgotten. The neighbors whispered about the strange man who never left his garage, who surrounded himself with books and cables, who seemed possessed. Possessed, that was the word. Because what else do you call a man who trades his life for a vision? But possession has a cost. His hands shook. His eyes burned. His marriage strained under the endless hours, the unrelenting obsession. Friends stopped calling. Colleagues from his past crossed the street to avoid the conversation. He was alone in the storm he had created, clinging to a dream no one else could fully see. The first investors who came to his door weren't impressed by the garage, or the desks built from doors, or the chaos stacked to the ceiling. They saw risk. They saw a man betting against the established world, against giants that had existed for decades. Many walked away. Some laughed. And Jeff, smiling with polite persistence, closed the door behind them, his face tightening into stone as their footsteps faded. But a few believed. Not in the company, not even in the idea, but in the intensity burning in his voice. They invested not in books, but in him, a man who spoke as if the future were already written, as if the world had no choice but to bend to his vision. Their money didn't erase the risk, but it bought time. And time was the one currency Jeff craved more than wealth. Still, there were nights when he thought of surrender. Nights when the silence between orders stretched too long, when the debts pressed too heavy, when the laughter of doubters echoed too loud. In those moments, he would sit in the dark garage, surrounded by towers of books, and ask himself, is this worth it? Or am I just digging a deeper grave? The first true test came with scale. Growth was both gift and curse. Suddenly, the world noticed. Orders surged. Servers collapsed. Critics sharpened their knives. Lawsuits arrived, accusing him of cutting corners, of overpromising, of chasing the impossible. Competitors mocked the bookstore in the ether, convinced it was a bubble destined to burst. Jeff absorbed it all, the shame, the fear, the exhaustion, and he transformed it into fuel. He drove his team harder, pushed himself further, demanded the impossible because he believed the impossible was the only path forward. There was a night when an employee collapsed from fatigue. Another walked out, unable to endure the relentless pressure. Whispers of cruelty surrounded him. Was he building a dream or destroying lives in the process? Jeff didn't flinch. He told himself that the world only remembers the victors, not the sacrifices along the way. The doubt gnawed at him, but he buried it beneath layers of ambition. And then came the fragile taste of recognition. A headline, a spotlight. Amazon was no longer a whisper in the dark. It was a name people repeated. Customers spoke of it. Journalists doubted it. Competitors feared it. The world had turned its gaze toward him, not with admiration, but with curiosity. Could this strange little garage-born company survive? The first prophet arrived like a ghost, small, insignificant on paper, but to him it was thunder. It was proof that the madness had weight, that the nights of silence and fear were not in vain. He stared at the numbers until they blurred, until his vision swam with exhaustion. And then he laughed not with joy, but with something darker. A laugh of survival. A laugh that said, "You tried to bury me, but I am still here." Yet victory carried its own poison. With growth came enemies sharper than before. Wall Street demanded results. Shareholders demanded profit. Competitors sharpened lawsuits into weapons. Every victory revealed another battlefield. He realized then that the dream would never be safe. There would never be peace. Amazon's birth wasn't the end of the storm, it was the storm itself, one that would consume his life forever. But he accepted it because he understood the truth. Security is an illusion. Comfort is a cage. The only path worth walking is the one lined with shadows, where every step threatens collapse, but also holds the chance for transformation. And so, the man who once lay awake, haunted by mediocrity, embraced the silence of the abyss. He chose to live with fear as a companion, to walk hand in hand with doubt, to pay the price of obsession. He would rise higher, yes. He would become the face of a global empire. But in the quiet moments, when the lights fade and the world grows silent, he still hears the echoes of those first nights in the garage. The hum of servers barely holding together. The smell of cardboard and ink. The weight of debt pressing like a stone on his chest. The voice in the darkness asking, "What if you fail?" And he smiles, because he knows the answer. Failure was never the enemy. Comfort was. The first step had already killed the man he feared becoming, the man who stayed safe, who grew old in a corner office, who traded his fire for routine. That man is gone. In his place stands someone else, someone who chose the abyss, and in doing so, carved a path no one else dared to walk. The empire began with fear. It began with silence. It began with one man who decided that doubt was not a reason to stop, but a reason to begin. And that is the scar he carries, the scar of the first step, the scar that never fades, even under billions of dollars, even under history's spotlight. Because every night, beneath the weight of triumph, Jeff Bezos remembers the truth. The first victory is never clean. It is fragile, haunted, built on sacrifice and shadow. It is the taste of survival, not celebration. And deep inside, the question still lingers, whispering in the dark. What if I had quit? He will never know. But the world does. Because Amazon exists,